My name is Voruk Pelthane, and I am going to tell you the single most humiliating story in the entire recorded history of the Greth Armada. I am going to tell it to you because somebody has to, because the High Command certainly will not, because Admiral Dral Sox has spent the last 14 months pretending none of it happened, and because the official war archive lists the whole catastrophe under the very creative title of Tactical Reorganization Period, which is, without question, the most cowardly thing I have ever read in my 46 years of military service. So, here it is, the truth, all of it. You are welcome. Let us begin at the moment everyone in the Greth Armada agreed was our greatest victory. The humans called it the Battle of Caelis Station. We called it the surrender of the soft species. I know, very dignified. Admiral Sox named it himself. He had a whole ceremony prepared. There were flags, there was a speech, there was, and I cannot stress this enough, a commemorative dessert served in the officers' mess that evening, shaped like a broken human warship. It was chocolate. It was delicious. It was also, in hindsight, a monument to our collective stupidity. The station itself hung at the edge of the asteroid belt surrounding the third planet, what the humans called Earth. It was large by human standards, roughly the size of our smallest patrol carrier. It had thick plating, 12 weapons arrays, and it had been until 27 hours prior the command center for the last organized human resistance fleet in the entire solar system. And then it went quiet. The human commander sent through her surrender codes at 0300, ship time. The message was short. The message was dignified, actually, which surprised a few of our junior officers who had been expecting crying. There was no crying, there was no begging. There was just the formal transmission, 7 words spoken in flat, cold standard, and then silence. Caelis Station stands down. Do with us what you will. 7 words. That was it. The commander who sent them was a woman named Mira Sable. We knew the name. Of course we knew the name. Mira Sable was the reason the war had taken 9 months longer than projected. She was the reason 3 of our cruisers were currently sitting at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. She was the reason our intelligence officer, a perfectly competent male named Queth, had developed what he described as a persistent eye twitch that had not gone away in 7 months. She was, in the polite military terminology of the Greth Armada, a significant tactical nuisance. She was, in the considerably less polite terminology used by the soldiers who had actually faced her in the field, that nightmare in a flight suit. She had held the resistance together with nothing but willpower, creative weapons repurposing, and what our analysts eventually concluded must be a complete and total absence of the survival instinct. Humans have this thing where they do not quit when they should. Biologically, scientifically, mathematically, they should have quit. 3 times we had broken their supply lines. Twice we had destroyed their primary communications array. Once, in what I still consider our most impressive tactical move of the entire campaign, we had managed to cut off their fuel reserves for 11 days. For 11 days, Mira Sable ran her resistance fleet on recycled cooking oil, and what one captured human soldier cheerfully described as sheer attitude. We are still not entirely sure what sheer attitude is as a fuel source, but the results were undeniable. And yet, eventually, even Mira Sable ran out of options. The mathematics caught up. The supplies ran dry. The Allied human governments had already negotiated their individual terms of surrender weeks before, leaving the resistance fleet floating alone in a solar system that had effectively changed ownership. So she surrendered. And we, the proud and victorious Greth Armada, accepted. Admiral Sox personally oversaw the processing of the Caelis Station prisoners. There were 412 of them, mostly soldiers, some engineers, 3 people whose exact roles nobody could quite determine but who all claimed to be consultants, which apparently is a human job that can mean almost anything. They were processed, catalogued, and assigned to holding facilities on our secondary carrier, the Grudith, commanded by a very thorough officer named Pelox Dane, who was excellent at paperwork and deeply committed to protocol. Mira Sable herself was assigned to a private cell on level 4 of the Grudith, separate from the others, monitored at all times. 3 guards on rotation, every door coded to her biometrics, every vent sealed, every possible exit point logged and double-logged. Pelox Dane was, as I said, very thorough. He was so thorough, in fact, that he wrote a 17-page report on the security measures surrounding prisoner Sable, which Admiral Sox skimmed for approximately 40 seconds before declaring it, quote, satisfactory. 40 seconds. 17 pages. I want you to remember that detail. It will become important. Anyway, the war was over. Caelis Station fell quiet. The Greth Armada began the long administrative process of establishing formal governance over the human solar system. There were resource surveys to conduct, planetary infrastructure to assess, 17 different bureaucratic committees to form and then argue with each other for months about jurisdiction. Normal stuff. Completely ordinary post-conquest administration. And for 6 weeks, everything was fine. For 6 weeks, the holding facility on the Grudath ran smoothly. The human prisoners ate their meals, were given their allotted recreation periods, complained about the temperature being too cold, then complained that it was too warm, then asked if we could do something about the smell, which, for the record, was coming from them, not from us. Mira Sable, specifically, was a model prisoner. She ate. She slept regular hours. She read. She did what the humans call exercise, which involves lying on the floor and pushing yourself up repeatedly for no apparent reason, an activity that our behavioral analyst Queth observed on the security feed and described in his notes as ritualistic self-punishment, purpose unclear. She made no trouble. She asked for nothing unusual. She spoke to the guards during their rotation changes with the same flat, polite efficiency she had used in her surrender message. Good morning. Thank you. Have a good shift. That was it. Every day. Like clockwork. Quetha said she was adjusting. Quetha said the behavioral patterns were consistent with a subject entering a long-term compliance mindset. Quetha said everything was proceeding exactly as expected. Quath, bless his twitching eye, was catastrophically wrong. The first sign that something was off came on the 43rd day. Not a dramatic sign, nothing that would make it into a film. It was a small thing, a tiny, easy-to-dismiss thing. It was the kind of thing that, in retrospect, you want to go back and physically shake your past self for ignoring. One of the guards on Mira Sable's rotation, a young soldier named Brev Solith, mentioned in his end-of-shift report that the prisoner had asked him a question. Not an unusual question, not a threatening question. She had simply asked him with genuine-seeming curiosity what the atmospheric processor units on Level 4 smelled like when they were about to malfunction. She said she had worked with similar systems on Caelis Station and thought she might have detected an odd odor. She said she just wanted to make sure she was not about to breathe recycled carbon for the next 6 hours. Brev Solith noted it down because he was diligent. He noted it down and added a line saying, "No indication of hostile intent. Prisoner appears concerned about air quality." Nobody flagged it, because why would they? She was asking about a smell. She was being considerate about her own breathing. Very normal, very benign. The atmospheric processor on Level 4 malfunctioned 4 days later. It was a minor malfunction, just a pressure valve that stuck partially closed. The repair technician fixed it in 20 minutes and marked the cause as standard wear and corrosion. And life went on. And Mira Sable kept eating her meals, doing her floor-pushing exercises, and saying good morning to her guards with the exact same tone every single day. The second sign came on the 51st day. This one was slightly less easy to dismiss, but we managed anyway, because we are, as established, excellent at that. One of the prison level's maintenance droids flagged a minor error in its patrol log. A gap, 38 seconds, where its sensor sweep of the corridor outside cell block D had returned no data, just a blank, a blink. The droid's internal clock said 38 seconds had passed, but the sensor record showed nothing. 38 seconds. Sensor gap. Corridor D. Pilox Dane's security team reviewed it, found no evidence of tampering, concluded it was a calibration glitch in the droid's sweep array, filed a maintenance order, and moved on. 38 seconds. Later, much later, we would count exactly how many doors you could open and close in 38 seconds if you already knew which ones had pressure latch mechanisms instead of electronic locks. If you had spent 6 weeks doing nothing but looking at those doors, at those latches, at those guards, at those droids and their patrol intervals, and quietly, patiently, methodically learning the shape of the cage around you, the answer is 4. You can open and close 4 doors in 38 seconds. But I am getting ahead of myself. The moment the whole situation became, let us say, undeniable, was on the 61st day at 0400 hours. I was in the officers' mess on the flagship Karath. I was eating breakfast. It was early, I know. I have never been able to sleep past 0330, which my doctor says is stress-related, and my colleagues say is what happens when you spend 15 years in military intelligence. Both are probably right. The breakfast was decent. Some kind of grain paste with a nutrient supplement that our ship chef had optimistically described as savory. It was not savory. It was aggressively neutral, like eating an absence of flavor. But I was eating it, and I had a datapad open, and I was reviewing routine patrol reports from the outer belt. and then my communications unit buzzed. The ID tag on the signal said, GR death. Security officer, priority urgent. I put down my spoon. I stared at the words priority urgent for roughly 2 seconds. In 15 years of intelligence work, priority urgent in the middle of the night has never once meant good news. Not a single time. It is always either a catastrophic oversight or an impossibly inconvenient problem, and the only difference between those two things is how much paperwork follows. I answered. The face on the screen was Pelox Dane's, and Pelox Dane was a very composed officer. I had served briefly alongside him 3 years earlier during the Caelis campaign. He was the kind of man who could watch an entire supply depot explode and calmly begin drafting the incident report before the fire went out. He did not look composed right now. He looked, and I choose this word carefully, shaken. Pelthane, he said. Dane. I said, what happened? He took a breath, a long one. Then he said the 8 words that effectively ruined the next 14 months of my life. Prisoner Sable is not in her cell. I stared at him. Sorry? She is not there. The cell is empty. The lock was not broken. The alarm did not trip. The monitoring feed shows her lying on her bunk at 0347, and then at 0351 the feed shows her still lying there, and then at 0403 a guard went to do a visual check, and the bunk had a folded blanket on it arranged to look like a person, and Mira Sable was gone. I stared at him for a long moment. The feed shows her lying there at 0351. I said slowly, yes. And she was gone by 0403. Yes. No. So she left between 0351 and 0403. That is correct. In 12 minutes. Yes. Through a locked cell on a secured level in the middle of an Armada carrier. Yes. I looked down at my grain paste. I looked back at Pelox Dane. The monitoring feed at 0351. Was that live footage or was it looped? Pelox closed his eyes briefly. We are still determining that. Right. I said. Right. Okay. I pushed the grain paste aside. I am going to wake the Admiral. I have already begun a full carrier sweep. All exits are secured. She cannot have left the ship. We will find her in the next 20 minutes. He said it with such confidence. Such total, committed confidence. Bless him. Dine, I said, very carefully. This is Mira Sable. She is one unarmed human woman with no external contacts and no knowledge of our ship systems. She asked your guard about atmospheric processors 43 days ago. Silence. She flagged a pressure valve malfunction before it happened. More silence. 43 days ago. Dane, a very long, very heavy silence. I will expand the sweep to include maintenance shafts, he said finally, and the exterior hull access points. I said. She would not have the access codes. No, I said, she would not. Do you want to explain that to Admiral Socks, or shall I? Pelox Dane looked at me with the expression of a man who had just realized that his 17-page security protocol report was about to become the most famous document of his career for entirely the wrong reasons. I will include the hull access points in the sweep, he said. We swept the entire ship, all 940 meters of it, every level, every maintenance shaft, every storage compartment, every pressurized access tunnel and emergency crawl space and equipment locker large enough to fit a human. We had every available crew member on the Grudith actively searching, and Pelox Dine ran it all with extraordinary efficiency, because he was excellent at his job, and his excellent job had just been thoroughly outsmarted by a prisoner using nothing but her eyes and 6 weeks of patience. The sweep took 4 hours and 11 minutes. Mira Sable was not on the ship. She was not anywhere on the ship. At 0822, Pelox Dane calmed me again. He looked even less composed than before, which I had not thought was possible. She is not on the Grudith, he said. I know. That should be impossible. The external hull sensors would have. Did you check the hull sensors for the same kind of loop she used on the monitoring feed? A pause. We are doing that now. Dane, I said. How many ships were within docking range of the Grudith between 0300 and 0500? Another pause. Longer this time. 3, he said. 2 supply drones on automated routing and. He stopped. And I said. And a maintenance shuttle from the Pelivar, bringing calibration equipment for the atmospheric processors. I let that sit there in the air between us for a moment. Lovely and horrible and perfectly obvious in hindsight, the way all terrible realizations are. The atmospheric processors, I said. Yes. Which she asked your guard about 43 days ago. Yes. Which malfunctioned 8 days later. Yes, which then required calibration equipment from another ship. Yes, which was a maintenance shuttle. Yes, that she was almost certainly on. An even longer pause. "We are contacting the Pelivar," said Pelox Dane, in the voice of a man watching his career slowly sink beneath very cold water. The Pelivar confirmed, 22 minutes later, that its maintenance shuttle had returned as scheduled, had been logged and cleared by their docking crew, and had subsequently been found to contain one extra equipment case that nobody could account for, a case large enough to hold, for example, a folded-up human being who was accustomed to spending a great deal of time doing floor exercises and was therefore probably quite flexible. The equipment case was empty, of course. The case lock had been opened from the inside, which, again, should not have been possible with the standard internal mechanism. But here is the thing about Mira Sable, the thing that our intelligence division kept noting in her file and that everyone kept reading and then apparently immediately forgetting. She was an engineer before she was a commander. A real one, not a desk engineer. She had spent 8 years working in deep space construction before the war, before she got pulled into leading the resistance, before she became the nightmare in the flight suit. She had spent 8 years learning how machines worked, how they failed, how they could be persuaded to do things they were not designed to do. She had spent 6 weeks learning how our machines worked. Because we had given her nothing to do except look at them. We had, in our great and towering arrogance, locked the most dangerous engineer in the human resistance in a room full of our technology and then wondered why she had not stayed put. By the time we figured out she was on the Pelivar, she was not on the Pelivar. By the time we figured out which docking port she had used to leave the Pelivar, she was somewhere in the outer maintenance ring of the carrier, which connected, through a series of pressurized service tunnels that were never designed with unauthorized human transit in mind, to the small craft bay where our scout ships were docked. We know all of this now because of the forensic reconstruction Queth's team did afterward. At the time, we had no idea where she was. At the time, we were searching the wrong ship, and then the right ship, and then the tunnels, and the whole thing had the graceful efficiency of a group of highly trained soldiers chasing a ghost through their own house, while the ghost calmly reads the instruction manual for the front door. The scout ship went missing from Bay 7 at 11:41. Not dramatically, not with alarms and heroic last-second launches. The bay logs just showed a routine pre-flight sequence running, and then a ship leaving, and then a code authorization that looked, upon initial inspection, like a standard maintenance departure. The code was real. It belonged to a pilot named Reth Valor, who was, at 11:41, sitting in the Grudeth officer's mess, eating lunch, and having no idea his access code was currently helping a human woman steal a scout ship. He found out 20 minutes later when Pelox Dane showed up and asked him where his ship was. We have not as yet determined how she got his code. The working theory involves the atmospheric processor repair, a particular maintenance access panel in the corridor near the Level 4 guard station, and roughly 3 weeks of very careful observation of which officers' badge scanners had slightly worn contact points that broadcast their data slightly louder than intended. Quaith wrote 40 pages on it. I believe every word. I also think it is the most impressive thing I have ever been unwillingly forced to admire. The scout ship had a short-range comm system, standard navigation, enough fuel for, by our best calculations, 40 hours of travel at standard speed within the inner solar system. We scrambled 3 pursuit ships within 9 minutes of detecting the launch. We are fast. We are very, very good at pursuit. Our intercept protocols are some of the finest in the Greth Armada, and I am not saying that with sarcasm. I mean it. We train for this constantly. Our pilots are excellent. They found the scout ship 2 hours and 17 minutes later, drifting in the asteroid belt, engines cold, life support offline, cockpit empty, just floating there. Quiet, inert, like it had always been there. No pilot, no life signs, no Mira Sable. Our lead pursuit pilot, a very experienced officer named Dreth Khan, transmitted back to us and said, with audible disbelief, "The ship is empty. She is not here." And then, after a short pause, with considerably more audible disbelief, he said, "There is a note, on paper, human paper, from a notebook that she must have taken from somewhere, and I genuinely cannot account for where, because we have reviewed every centimeter of her path through our ships, and there is not a single point where she could have picked up a human notebook, and yet there it was." Dreth Khan read it aloud over the comet.com. His voice had the flat, careful tone of a professional who is doing his absolute best not to convey the exact degree to which he is losing his composure. It said, and I am going to quote this exactly because it has been burned into my memory with the permanence of a brand, Thanks for 6 weeks of room and board. Tell Queth his eye will stop twitching if he sleeps more. Sorry about the ship. I'll send it back eventually. Your atmospheric processors need better maintenance. You really should look into that. And then it was signed with her name. Just her name. Mira Sable. No rank, no unit, no dramatic declaration of war. Just her name, at the bottom of a stolen notepad page, in the empty cockpit of a stolen scout ship, drifting in an asteroid belt, 61 days after she had politely and formally surrendered to us. Queth read the note 3 times. Then he went and lay down. I do not blame him. I went to brief Admiral Socks. That was, in its own way, the worst part of that morning. Drow Socks was a tall alien, even by Greth standards. He had a long career, a longer list of victories, and the absolute unshakable conviction that every problem in the known universe could be solved by applying sufficient military force to it in a sufficiently organized manner. He had won 20 campaigns across 4 star systems. He had the medals to prove it. He had the commemorative chocolate warship dessert to prove it. He had also, 48 hours ago, filed the official post-conquest report to High Command, confirming that the human solar system was fully secured and that organized human resistance had been, quote, conclusively eliminated. I stood in front of his desk and told him everything. He did not move while I talked. He did not interrupt. His expression did not change. When I finished, he was quiet for a very long time. Then he said, in an extremely controlled voice, "She escaped." "Yes, sir." "From a locked cell." "Yes, sir." "On a secured carrier." "Yes, sir." "Through 3 separate ships." "Yes, sir." "Stole a scout ship." "Yes, sir." "Left a note." "Yes, sir." Another long pause. "She mentioned Queth by name." He said, "Yes, sir." "In the note." "Yes, sir." "By name." "Yes, sir." "She also mentioned his eye twitch, which she would have observed through the security feed in the cell corridor, though the angle suggests—" "Pelthane," said the Admiral. "Sir, stop talking." "Yes, sir." He stood up from his desk and went to the viewport and looked out at the stars for a very long time. Then he said, "Find her." "Yes, sir." "We have already begun recalibrating our long-range. Find her before High Command finds out what happened." "Yes, sir." "And tell no one about the note." "Sir, it has already been transmitted over the open comm by Drethcon, who tell everyone who heard it to tell no one about the note." I thought about how to explain that this was not how information worked. I decided not to. "Yes, sir," I said. I left his office and went back to my own, and I sat down and I looked at the data pad on my desk, and I thought about Mira Sable, about the 6 weeks, about the patience, and the stillness, and the quiet good mornings, and the floor exercises, about the atmospheric processor, and the maintenance shuttle, and the borrowed access code, and the handwritten note. She had walked out of our most secure prisoner facility, using nothing but time and attention. She was out there now, in a stolen ship, in a solar system that we technically occupied, with no supplies that we could account for, no contacts we could identify, and no backup we could locate. By every logical measurement, she was finished. She was one person with no resources, surrounded by the entire Greth Armada in a system we controlled completely. By every logical measurement, she should have been gone. Done. A footnote. I looked at the note again on my datapad, at her name at the bottom, neat and calm and completely without fear. I thought about the 9 months of war, about the recycled cooking oil, about the 3 cruisers at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. I thought about how she had spent 43 days staring at our atmospheric processors before she needed them, and I felt very quietly, very privately, a chill that had absolutely nothing to do with the temperature in my office. Because here is the thing. Here is the thing that took me 3 days to fully articulate, and another week to be willing to admit out loud, and several more months to completely understand in all its terrifying implications. She had not just escaped. She had escaped in a specific direction. The scout ship, when we found it, was drifting at a particular point in the asteroid belt, a specific cluster, a cluster that, 3 months earlier, before the war ended, before Caelis Station fell, had been the site of a minor skirmish between a small human patrol and one of our early scouting vessels. A skirmish that had lasted 11 minutes and had been marked in our records as negligible engagement, no significant losses. A skirmish that had taken place at the exact location of a very particular asteroid. Asteroid designation JX-7704. A rock, just a rock, nothing special. Not large enough to matter, not positioned near any resource deposits, not strategically significant by any metric we had applied. We had not applied very many metrics to it, because it was just a rock. Quethard, recovering slightly, pulled the old patrol records. He pulled the spectral scan data from the engagement. He pulled every piece of information we had on JX-7704. He called me on the third day. His eye had stopped twitching, which, given everything Queth had been through in the last 72 hours, should probably have been reassuring. It was not Pelthane, he said. Queth, I said, what did you find? The asteroid, he said, JX-7704. What about it? He paused, and in that pause I could hear the particular silence of a person who has just found something that completely reframes everything they thought they knew, and who is taking a single moment to mourn the simpler and more comfortable world that existed before this finding. There is a facility inside it, he said, small, very well hidden. We missed it completely during the initial system survey because it was designed to read as natural internal cave structure. The spectral signatures were almost perfect. I only found it because I knew what I was looking for, because she told us where to look. She told us. She told us by escaping to that location. Yes. And the facility? Operational, said Queth. Power readings consistent with active life support. Communication equipment, storage, and Pelthane, this is the part I need you to sit down for. I am already sitting. Sit more firmly. I put both feet on the floor. There are human life signs inside that asteroid, Quethus said. Multiple. I cannot get an exact count at this range, but the readings suggest at least 30, possibly more. I sat very, very firmly. 30, I said. At minimum, she had a backup plan, I said. From the beginning. She surrendered Caelis Station. She let herself be captured. She spent 60 days mapping our security and our systems, and she escaped to a pre-established secondary base that we never detected, that has been sitting in our controlled space this entire time, that is filled with her people. Yes, said Queth. She surrendered on purpose. Yes. The surrender was a tactical move. Yes. She walked into our prison deliberately. It appears so. I thought about the 7 words of her surrender message. The flat, cold, professional tone. No crying, no begging. Do with us what you will. Not despair, not defeat. A plan. It had always been a plan. I pinched the bridge of my nose. Outside my viewport, the stars of the human solar system were very beautiful and very quiet. Somewhere out there, past the asteroid belt, inside a rock that we had not thought to look at twice, Mira Sable was sitting with 30+ of her soldiers in a base that had been waiting for her. 6 weeks in our prison. 61 days of good mornings and floor exercises and polite questions about atmospheric processors. And now she was out. And she was not running. I knew. Even then, even in those first hours of understanding that she was not running. You do not spend 9 months refusing to quit. You do not recycled cooking oil your way through 11 days of fuel rationing. You do not walk deliberately into an enemy prison and spend 2 months of your life patiently learning the shape of your captor's world just so you can run away. She was not running. She had surrendered to get inside our systems. She had escaped to get back out. She had left the note because she wanted us to know it was her. She wanted us to know that she had been watching, that she had seen us, that she had learned us, and she had disappeared back into her asteroid because she was not finished. I sat in my office on the flagship Karath, surrounded by the most powerful armada the Greth had ever assembled, in a solar system we had conclusively conquered, and I thought very carefully about what came next. I thought about the 3 cruisers at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. I thought about the eye twitch. I thought about the note. And then I did something that I have never done in 46 years of military service. I calmed my immediate superior and told him, without preamble or softening, that we were not in fact done with this war. We had been so certain it was over. We had eaten the chocolate warship. We had filed the conclusive elimination report. We had sat back in the comfortable confidence of victors. Mira Sable had spent those same 6 weeks lying on her bunk in a locked cell, staring at our atmospheric processors and thinking, I will tell you what happened next. But first, I need you to understand one thing. Nothing that comes after this is going to make us look good. Not even a little bit. You have been warned. Here is what the Greth High Command did when I told them we were not finished. They told me I was wrong. I want to pause here and fully appreciate that moment. I had filed a detailed intelligence report, 17 supporting data appendices, Queth's spectral analysis of Asteroid JX-7704, forensic reconstruction of Mira Sable's escape route, and a projected threat assessment that used the word significant 14 times because I had run out of stronger words that did not sound hysterical. High Command read it. They read every page, and then High Command, speaking through their liaison officer, a very senior bureaucrat named Savlak, who had the manner of someone who had never once in his life been wrong about anything, told me that my analysis was the product of, quote, excessive caution following an isolated containment failure. Isolated, containment, failure. That is what they called it. Not catastrophic intelligence gap. Not a prisoner literally walked through 3 of our ships while we watched. Not the enemy commander we thought we had neutralized has turned out to have been running a long game that began before we even accepted her surrender. No, just isolated containment failure, as though Mira Sable escaping was roughly equivalent to leaving a side door unlocked. Savlak then informed me that the human solar system was formally and permanently pacified, that no organized resistance was capable of posing a meaningful threat to Greth occupation forces, and that the matter of prisoner Sable would be handled as a low-priority fugitive retrieval. Low priority. I wrote back and said that I respectfully disagreed. Savlak wrote back and said that my disagreement was noted, and that if I filed one more unsolicited threat reassessment without authorization, he would have me reassigned to atmospheric survey work in the outer belt, which is the Greth military's version of sending someone to stand in a corner and think about what they have done. I filed the threat reassessment anyway. He reassigned me to atmospheric survey work in the outer belt. I was out there for 12 days on a small survey vessel named the Tolith, taking readings of asteroid composition data that nobody was ever going to read. While back on the flagship Karath the official position remained, the war was over, the humans were pacified. The fugitive retrieval team would deal with one missing prisoner in due course, and everything was fine. It was during those 12 days that things started going wrong. Not dramatically wrong. Not at first. It was subtle, small things. The kind of things that if you are Admiral Socks and you are deeply committed to the position that everything is fine, you can explain away one at a time without ever having to look at them all together. On the 3rd day of my survey exile, a Greth communications relay in low Earth orbit stopped responding. Technical fault. A power coupling on the primary array burned out. Very common, apparently. Maintenance crew dispatched. Coupling replaced. Relay back online within 6 hours. On the 5th day, a supply convoy traveling between the Mars processing station and the main fleet carrier took an unusual route through the asteroid belt because their navigation computer flagged the standard corridor as having heightened debris risk. The reroute added 9 hours to the journey. The navigation flag turned out to be a false reading, a sensor ghost, nothing real. The convoy arrived late and everyone was annoyed. On the 7th day, Admiral Socks's private communications encryption key was flagged by the system as potentially compromised. The security sweep found nothing. The key was refreshed as a precaution. The Admiral was briefly irritated and then moved on. 3 things. 3 small, individually dismissible things, scattered across 7 days. Quelth was not being exiled in the outer belt. Quelth was still on the Karath, still running his analysis, still sleeping poorly, still finding things. He sent me a private message on the 8th day through a personal channel rather than the official one, which tells you everything you need to know about where his head was at. The message was 4 sentences long. The relay fault was not a power coupling failure. The coupling was intact. Something interfaced with the relay remotely and introduced a false fault reading to trigger the maintenance crew's visit. I cannot prove who did it yet, but you know who did it. I sat on my little survey vessel in the asteroid belt and read that 4 times. Then I sent back 1 sentence. What did the maintenance crew bring aboard during the repair visit? Quelth replied 11 minutes later. Updated diagnostic software from a package that was preloaded into the relay's external request queue approximately 49 days ago. Before she escaped, before she even tried to escape, 49 days ago, she had still been in her cell, still doing her morning exercises, still saying good morning to Brev Solith, still asking questions about atmospheric processors, and she had already somehow preloaded a software package into a communications relay in low Earth orbit. I am going to say that again for anyone who needs a moment with it. While sitting inside a locked cell on a secured level, on a carrier ship, being monitored 24 hours a day, Mira Sable had found a way to place a software package into a relay station that she was not physically anywhere near. We still have not completely reconstructed how. The leading theory involves the atmospheric processor repair crew from the Pelavar, whose equipment connected briefly to the ship's internal maintenance network, which has a very narrow and supposedly secure data bridge to external relay infrastructure for the purposes of automated diagnostic updates, which is the kind of bridge that exists because it is convenient and efficient, and absolutely nobody ever expects someone to use it to quietly slip a malicious software package into a communications installation from inside a prison cell. Mira Sable expected it. Because Mira Sable had spent 8 years building things in space, and she understood every system that connected to every other system, and she had spent 6 weeks looking at our system specifically, and she had apparently decided at some point during those 6 weeks that she was going to need remote access to our communications infrastructure before she left. So she arranged for it, while imprisoned, on the 40-somethingth day of her captivity. Because why not? I sent Greth back a message that said find everything she touched, every system, every relay, every interface. Assume she has already been inside all of it. Greth replied, I have been doing that for 3 days. Pelthane, there are 11 separate systems I can confirm she accessed. 11, and I think I am only finding the ones she wanted me to find. I looked out the viewport of the Tolith at the asteroid belt around me, at the rocks drifting quietly in the dark, at JX-7704, which was out there somewhere, which had 30+ humans inside it, which had been invisible to us for the entire length of the war. I calmed Admiral Sox directly, bypassing Sovlok entirely, which was technically insubordination and also completely necessary. The Admiral answered. He looked like a man who had not been sleeping well. I choose to believe Greth had been talking to him too. Pelthane, he said. Sir, I said, I need to be recalled from survey duty. You were reassigned by High Command Liaison. Sir, she has been inside 11 of our systems. At minimum, she preloaded access tools before she escaped. She compromised the low-orbit relay. She rerouted our supply convoy using a navigation ghost to buy time for something we have not identified yet, and she has had access to your private encryption key refresh cycle, which means she may have copies of your last 7 days of personal communications. Silence. Long, heavy, admiral-shaped silence. Come back to the Karath, he said. I was back within 4 hours. And I want you to know, I want to be very clear about the timeline here, because the timing matters enormously. I arrived back on the Karath at 14:30 on the 19th day after Mira Sable's escape. At 14:52, 22 minutes after I stepped off the shuttle, every external communication system on the Karath went offline simultaneously. Not a power failure, not a relay fault. A targeted, precise, system-by-system shutdown executed through our own maintenance network, using access credentials that looked completely legitimate to every security layer they passed through. It lasted 4 minutes and 31 seconds. In those 4 minutes and 31 seconds, we could not send a single transmission to any other ship in the fleet, to any ground installation, to High Command, to anyone. 4 minutes, 31 seconds. When systems came back online, every single one of our encrypted command channel keys had been replaced. Not broken, not stolen, replaced. New keys, keys we did not generate and did not recognize, installed in place of our own, meaning that anyone with the original replacement keys could read our supposedly secure communications going forward. Anyone, for example, who had generated those keys. Anyone, for example, who had spent several weeks quietly inside our communications infrastructure arranging exactly this. The communications security team worked for 6 hours to strip out the replacement keys and install fresh ones generated in an air-gapped environment. 6 hours during which every senior officer on the Karath communicated by physically walking to each other's offices, which is hilariously primitive and which I will admit gave me a completely unhinged sense of dark appreciation for the whole situation. Because that, right there, was Mira Sable's message. Not a note this time, not 7 words on a radio channel. This time the message was the act itself. She was saying, I am in your walls. I have been here since before I left. You cannot see me, but I can see you. Your locked doors are not locked to me. Your secure channels are not secure from me. You thought this was over. It is not over. I stood in Admiral Sox's office while the communications team worked, and the Admiral paced, which he had never done in my presence before, and I thought about the supply convoy reroute. The convoy, I said, the 9-hour delay through the asteroid belt. Sox stopped pacing. What about it? It was rerouted through a specific corridor, not a random one. She needed it to go through a specific area for long enough to do something, and the navigation ghost was the tool. What was the convoy carrying? Sox called up the manifest. He read it. His expression did not change, but a muscle in his jaw did something. Standard supplies, he said. Food stocks, medical consumables, maintenance parts. A pause. Atmospheric processor calibration equipment. We stared at each other. For the Grudeth, he said. Yes. Where she was held. Yes. She rerouted a supply convoy that was carrying equipment destined for the ship she escaped from. Yes. Why? Because, I said slowly, working it out as I said it. The Grudeth's atmosphere processors are still running on the maintenance update that was installed when the first fault was repaired. The one the Pelavar's crew brought. The one that may have been the original vector for her software access. And if that update contains something she put there, something that has been sitting dormant in the Grudeth's maintenance system for the last 8 weeks, then replacing the calibration equipment on those processors would have triggered whatever she left behind. Sox looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "Get me Pelox Dine." We got Pelox Dane. Pelox, to his enormous credit, had already begun running a sweep of the Grudeth's processor systems before we called, because Pelox was excellent at his job, and because he had been living with the specific horror of Mira Sable's escape for 3 weeks, and had developed, like all of us, a very particular kind of paranoia. He had found something. It was in the diagnostic layer of the atmospheric system, buried under 4 levels of routine maintenance logging, formatted to look like calibration data. Small, compact, dormant, but when the calibration equipment from the rerouted convoy was installed and the update was pushed, it would have activated. What does it do? Sox asked. Pelox looked uncomfortable. It opens a data relay port, he said. Narrow band. Looks like standard telemetry traffic. It would have allowed external read access to the Grudeth's security logs, everything. Guard rotation schedules, prisoner records, visitor manifests, all of it. Whoever was receiving that relay would have had a live feed of everything happening in our holding facility. She was going to spy on her own prison, I said. Not really to anyone, just to the room, just to the universe. She was going to use the Grudeth as an intelligence source, said Queth, who had appeared in the doorway at some point during this conversation. She has 411 people still in that facility. She was going to watch over them. From outside, from the asteroid. The room was quiet for a moment. I thought about the 411, about how she had left them behind when she escaped, about how that had seemed at the time like proof that she had run out of options, that she had saved herself and left her people to their fate. It had not seemed that way for several days now, and standing in that room it seemed least of all like that. She had not abandoned them. She had left them there deliberately, as another part of the plan, because 411 prisoners in a Greth holding facility were also, if you thought about it from the right angle, 411 sources of information, 411 observers inside our systems, eating our food, breathing our processed air, talking to our guards, watching our routines. She had not surrendered her people. She had deployed them. We need to move the prisoners, I said. What? Said Pelox. Now, immediately, separate them, scatter them across multiple facilities, break up any group large enough to coordinate, and we need to audit every single system they have been near since arriving on the Grudeth. Every interface, every access point, every guard's personal device that came within range of a human during a recreation period. Assume contamination until proven otherwise. All Sox looked at me. That is 2,000 hours of security work. Yes, on 411 prisoners who have by all accounts been entirely compliant. Yes, who have caused no trouble, filed no complaints beyond temperature preferences, and shown no behavior that suggests active subversion. Sir, I said, she showed no behavior that suggested active subversion either. For 61 days, another muscle in Sox's jaw moved. Move the prisoners, he said to Pelox. Begin the audit. The prisoner transfer began within 2 hours, and within 4 hours of the prisoner transfer beginning, we received the first signal from JX-7704. Not a weapons signature, not a movement signature, not anything that showed up on our tactical systems at all. It was a communication. A human frequency radio transmission, narrow band, encrypted with a cipher we had not seen before, aimed directly at the Karath's communication array, aimed directly at us. Queth's team broke the cipher in 40 minutes, which is very good work, and honestly I suspect Mira Sable knew they could do it in 40 minutes, which is why she used that particular encryption, not because she expected it to hold, because 40 minutes was how long she needed. The decrypted message was audio, Mira Sable's voice. I am going to quote it in full, every word, because it matters, and because I have spent the last 11 months wishing I could somehow unknow it, and since that is not an option, I want everyone else to know it too. She said, Admiral Sox. Pelthane, if you are listening, hello again. Tell Queth his eye was a giveaway by the way, he should work on that. I am going to keep this brief because I know you are very busy right now moving your prisoners and running your system audits, and I do not want to take up your time. I have a proposal for you. Not a surrender, not a negotiation. A proposal. You have 411 of my people. I have information that your high command does not yet have, and that if received through the wrong channels at the wrong time will cause you considerable institutional difficulty. I would like to discuss an exchange, civilian evacuation terms for my people, and for the 300,000 humans remaining on occupied Earth, in exchange for everything I know about what is currently happening inside your command structure, that your senior officers have not told High Command about yet. You have 6 days to respond. I will know if you try to move on JX-7704 before then. I will know because I can currently read your tactical network. Please do not embarrass yourself by trying. That was the message. It ended there. 6 words had kicked this whole thing off. 22 days earlier. Caelis Station stands down. Do with us what you will. This message was considerably longer, and it was doing something completely different. This was not surrender. This was not even a threat. Not exactly. It was a negotiation opening. And the thing that made everyone in the room go very, very quiet was not the part about the prisoners, or the civilian evacuation demand, or even the part where she said she could read our tactical network, which was terrifying enough on its own. It was the part about the high command information. Because Mira Sable had spent 6 weeks inside our systems, and before that she had spent 9 months fighting us, and in 9 months of fighting she had captured our ships and our personnel and our equipment, and she had taken things from those captures, knowledge things, intelligence things, and she had been building a picture of the Greth Armada from the outside in. And Admiral Sox knew, and I knew, and Quaith knew, and Palox Dane knew that there were things happening inside the Greth command structure that High Command did not officially know about. Resource diversion from the occupied territories, supply manifest discrepancies, a very particular set of communications between Sox and 3 other fleet admirals regarding the actual population numbers on Earth versus the numbers reported to the Governance Committee. Small things, on paper, the kind of administrative gray area that exists in every military occupation and that nobody above you ever explicitly approves, but also nobody ever explicitly forbids. The kind of thing that if it landed in front of the High Command Governance Committee with full documentation and clear evidence, would result in a very long, very unpleasant review process for everyone involved. The kind of thing that Mira Sable, with 11 confirmed access points inside our systems and an unknown number of unconfirmed ones, and 6 weeks of watching us from inside, and 9 months of fighting us from outside, had almost certainly already fully documented. She was not threatening to blow us up. She was threatening to file a report. And that, somehow, was worse. Sox dismissed everyone from the room except me. I waited. He stood at the viewport for a long time, long enough for 2 full orbital cycles of the small monitoring satellite visible from that angle. Then he said, "She spent 61 days in our prison, and she still came out of it with more leverage than us." "Yes," I said. "She is one woman. She has 30+ personnel in the asteroid and 411 in our facility. One woman and a very committed support team." He amended, "She also has 11 of our systems, and whatever she loaded into the Grudith's processors before we caught it, and whatever else she put in place that Queth has not found yet. And documentation of our internal reporting discrepancies. Almost certainly, yes." He turned from the viewport. He looked tired. Not the way Queth looked tired, which was the tiredness of a man being continuously outsmarted and knowing it. Soxx looked tired the way very old certainties look when they start to bend. "She wants her people out," he said, "and the civilians." That is what she said, in exchange for not going to High Command with whatever she has. That is the proposal. He was quiet for a moment. "If we agree to that, she wins." "Sure," I said carefully, "she already won. What we are negotiating now is the conditions of our acknowledgement of that fact." He looked at me. "She walked into our prison on purpose," I said. "She escaped to demonstrate what she could do. She compromised our communications to show us she could do it from outside. She sent the message to show us she had been watching before she even left. Every step of this, from the surrender at Caelis Station to right now, has been a controlled demonstration, not of force, because she does not have enough force to match us, of capability, of the fact that she is inside our walls whether we can see her or not, and that shutting her out is not an option we have. We could move on the asteroid," he said. "JX-7704, take it by force." She said she would know if we tried. She might be bluffing. "Admiral," I said, "in 22 days, has she bluffed about a single thing? A long pause. "No," he said. "She told us the atmospheric processors needed maintenance." "They did." She told Quaith his eye was a giveaway. It was. She told us she would send the scout ship back eventually. Did we check whether the scout ship had been remotely guided back to the outer belt docking queue? Sox blinked. Had it? Queth flagged it this morning. The ship was in the automated docking queue for the Pelivar. Arrived there sometime last night. Nobody knows how. But she said she would return it, and she returned it. He stared at me. She keeps her word, I said. Everything she has told us has been true. Every capability she has demonstrated has been real. She is not bluffing about the tactical network. She is not bluffing about the documentation, and she is not going to accept anything less than what she asked for. The silence in the room was the specific silence of an admiral making a decision that will follow him for the rest of his career. "Contact JX-7704, he said finally. "Acknowledge receipt of her proposal. Tell her we are willing to discuss terms." "Yes, sir." "And Pelthane, sir, when you contact her, do not use any system that she has had access to." I opened my mouth, closed it again. "Sir," I said slowly, "we do not know the full extent of what she has accessed." He stared at me. "We should probably assume," I said, "that if we are going to attempt a secure channel, we should generate new equipment, fresh from sealed storage, never previously networked, never previously connected to anything, and transmit from a location she has not physically been near. Is there such a location?" We both thought about that, possibly the outer atmospheric survey vessel, I said. He stared at me again. "The Tolith." "Yes." "Your exile ship." "Yes, sir." "The ship she definitely has not been near. It was reassigned as punitive duty 12 days ago, after the threat assessment disagreement with Sovlakol. It has been doing boring atmospheric readings ever since. I cannot imagine she considered it worth compromising." The Admiral actually, briefly looked like he wanted to laugh. He contained it. "Barely. Take the Tolith," he said. "Use its comms, and Pelthane, try to negotiate something that does not require us to report the full details of this conversation to High Command." "Understood," I said. I went back to the Tolith. I spent 6 hours preparing a fresh communication package on equipment that had never touched the Karath's networks. I drafted the opening response with Queth on a hardwired console that had not been connected to anything in its operational life except atmospheric sensor data. At 2200, I transmitted to the coordinates Mira Sable had provided in her message. Her response came back within 8 minutes. 8 minutes. From inside an asteroid. Through a narrow-band channel. She had been waiting. Of course she had been waiting. What followed was 6 days of the most unusual negotiation I have ever participated in, and I have negotiated demilitarization terms in 2 separate star systems and once brokered a ceasefire between 2 factions that had been shooting at each other for so long that neither of them could clearly remember what had started it. Mira Sable was a better negotiator than any of them, not aggressive, not demanding. She knew what she wanted and she knew what we could give, and she had clearly thought about the shape of an acceptable compromise for a very long time. Longer than 6 weeks, I suspect. She had probably been thinking about it for most of the 9 months of the war, in the quiet moments between fuel crises and ocean floor cruisers and cooking oil logistics. She gave ground on the timeline. She was firm on the scope. She wanted all 411 prisoners released. She wanted safe passage for every human civilian remaining in the occupied territories. She wanted a formal withdrawal commitment from the inner system within 90 standard days. She was willing to allow us to maintain a presence in the outer belt for a period not to exceed 3 years, subject to a monitoring arrangement, the details of which she had prepared in a 14-page document that she transmitted on the second day of negotiations, and that was so thorough, so precisely structured, and so clearly the product of months of careful preparation that Queth read it and then sat quietly for a while, before noting that the monitoring framework she proposed was actually more rigorous than the one Greth High Command had used in its last 3 post-conflict settlements. She had written a better occupation protocol than we had. While we were occupying her planet, on the 4th day she sent over the documentation she had compiled on our internal reporting discrepancies, not as a threat, as a gesture of good faith, as evidence that she had it, and that she was not using it as leverage any longer, because the negotiation was going in a direction that made leverage unnecessary. It was 47 pages. It was very thorough. It was also, and this is perhaps the most perfect detail of the whole extraordinary series of events, organized with a table of contents and footnotes, and properly formatted citations. She had been inside our administrative records, and she had cited them correctly. Queloth read the documentation and said nothing for almost an hour. Then he said, "She is an excellent researcher. She is an excellent everything." I said, "That is the problem." On the 6th day we reached an agreement. I will not bore you with all the details, because there are a great many of them, and Mira Sable's 14-page monitoring framework became a 31-page binding appendix to the main agreement text, and the whole document ran to 94 pages, which Admiral Sachs signed with the expression of a man swallowing something large and undignified. The key points were these. The 411 prisoners would be released within 14 days. The civilian evacuation process would begin within 30 days and complete within the 90-day withdrawal window. The Greth Armada would maintain a reduced presence in the outer system under the monitoring arrangement Mira Sable had designed, which had enough verification mechanisms built into it that even Queth admitted it was probably airtight. And the documentation she had compiled on the internal reporting discrepancies would be sealed, not destroyed. Sealed, with a copy held by a neutral third party that both sides agreed on, accessible only under specific conditions that would realistically never apply if everyone honored the terms of the agreement. She kept it, but she put it away. That was, in its way, the most sophisticated thing she did across all of it. Not destroying the leverage, not using it, just making sure everyone knew it existed and knew where it was, and that the consequences of breaking the agreement would be very clear and very immediate. It was a lock, a very elegant lock, built out of information instead of steel. The prisoners started coming home on day 14. I watched the transfer from the Tolith because I was still technically in exile and Sachs had not officially recalled me, and also because I needed to see it with my own eyes. All 411, walking out of the Grudith's holding levels in good health, moving through the designated transfer zone to the human shuttle waiting at the neutral point we had agreed on. And at the very end of the line, after everyone else had gone through, there was one more figure, tall, contained, moving with the same flat efficiency that had characterized every moment of her the Greth Armada had ever been able to observe. She stopped at the transfer zone threshold and turned back, and she looked directly at the monitoring camera, and she knew we were watching, because of course she did. She did not wave. She did not make any dramatic gesture. She just looked at the camera for 3 seconds, calm and steady and with the expression of someone who had done exactly what she set out to do and was now ready to go home. Then she walked through the threshold and was gone. Brev Solith, who was still on his rotation in that section, watched her go and then said, to no one in particular, "I kind of liked her." Nobody argued with him. I filed my final report on the situation 4 weeks later, after the withdrawal had begun, and the civilian evacuation was running on schedule, and the whole extraordinary episode was settling into the specific kind of history that nobody wants to talk about officially, but that everyone who was there will never stop thinking about. The report was thorough. I tried to be honest, even where honesty was uncomfortable, which was most of the time. Admiral Sachs read it and sent back a single line, "Good work. Also, this report does not exist." Quaith read it and sent back a longer response, several paragraphs, thoughtful and precise, analyzing the intelligence failures and what could be learned from them. At the very end, he added a single personal note. "My eye twitch is gone. I do not know whether to credit better sleep or the fact that she is no longer our problem." I sent back both, probably. He sent back, "I am going to think about this for the rest of my career." I sent back, "Yes, so am I." Pelox Dane wrote his own report, 43 pages, which is longer than the 17-page security protocol that had started all of this. It was a complete, honest, systematic account of every point where his containment measures had been insufficient. It was one of the most thorough self-critiques I have ever read from a senior officer. He sent it to me with a note that said, "For the record, in case it helps someone somewhere not make the same mistakes." I kept it. It is in my personal files. I have read it several times. Reth Valor, the pilot whose access code Mira Sable had borrowed, was cleared of any wrongdoing and promoted 6 months later. He did not speak about the incident publicly for a long time. When he eventually did, in a conversation I was told about secondhand, he said, "I have been a pilot for 19 years. I have never lost a ship. Technically I still have not because she returned it. I choose to focus on that." Dreth Khan, who had found the empty scout ship and read the note aloud over the comm, retired from active service 8 months after the agreement was signed. He was quoted, in his informal farewell remarks to his crew, as saying, "If there is one lesson I want you to take from my career, it is this: never assume the cage is working just because the prisoner seems comfortable." It became something of a motto, not officially, just the kind of thing that gets repeated in certain circles. in quiet conversations, by people who were there and who understand what it means. And Mira Sable herself? She went home, back to Earth, to whatever was left of her old life, and to the work of rebuilding what the occupation had damaged and taken. I do not have reliable information about what she did in the months following, and I chose not to seek it. Some gaps in the intelligence record are better left as gaps. What I do know is that the monitoring framework she designed has been, in the time since the agreement, flawlessly observed on both sides. Every checkpoint met, every verification completed, every condition honored. I know because I check, regularly. Because she made the framework and she made it well, and she put her name on it, and Mira Sable, as this whole catastrophic, humiliating, extraordinary episode demonstrated more clearly than anything else I have experienced in my career, keeps her word, even when she is the one watching to make sure everyone else keeps theirs. My name is Voruk Pelthane. I have served 46 years in the Greth Armada. I have fought in 7 campaigns across 4 star systems. I have worked in military intelligence long enough to have seen most of the ways that superior forces can underestimate inferior ones, and most of the ways that turns out badly. I have never seen it turn out quite like this. The official archive still calls it the tactical reorganization period. Sovlak, the high command liaison who told me my threat assessment was excessive caution, was promoted 6 months later. Admiral Sox retained his command and his medals and never publicly discussed any of it. The chocolate warship dessert was served one more time, at a private officer's dinner I was not invited to, and then quietly retired from the mess menu. And in a small, unremarkable asteroid in the middle of a belt in a solar system that the Greth Armada had, briefly and humblingly believed it owned, there is an empty facility now, clean, orderly, left exactly as it was found. Except for one thing. On the wall of the central operations room, written in black ink on the otherwise bare surface, in handwriting that Quith confirmed via exemplar comparison belongs to Mira Sable, are 4 words. Just 4 words. We found them during the post-withdrawal inspection. Our survey team photographed them and sent the image back without comment, which tells you that they understood immediately that there was no comment adequate to the situation. The words were, "Thanks for the practice." That is all. 4 words on a wall. No signature this time. She did not need one. I have the photograph on my desk. I look at it sometimes. When I am writing reports or reviewing intelligence assessments or briefing junior officers on threat evaluation methodology, I look at it and I think about 6 weeks of patience, about good mornings and floor exercises, about atmospheric processors and 43 days of looking before you need, about how a cage is only a cage if the person inside it has not already figured out the shape of the door. And then I go back to work. Carefully,